The worsening crisis in Syria raises questions about who really runs the country. Is President Bashar al-Assad a brutal leader putting on an act as reformer, or is he a member of a ruling family that really holds the reins behind the scenes? The Syrian uprising and the inner circle that runs the country. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. Last month, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said he was serious about reform. And indeed, within days, he scrapped the emergency law, released political prisoners, gave citizenship to the Kurds and abolished the notorious Supreme State Security Court. But a few days later, his army rolled into Daraa, the southern city where the uprising began. Hundreds of people were killed, the town was besieged, communications cut off, and the nearby border with Jordan was sealed. The apparent contradictions between words and actions made people wonder, who are Syria's real power brokers? Well, many experts say that Bashar's power depends on a group of people, mostly from his own family. The most prominent figures in this inner circle are Maher al-Assad, the president's brother, described as Syria's all-powerful security man. He believes that only military options can save the regime. He commands the Syrian army's 4th division that led the charge into Daraa. The number 2 man is Asif Shawkat, Bashar's brother-in-law and Maher's greatest rival. He's the army's deputy chief of staff and the former head of the feared military intelligence. Maher and Shawkat control Syria's guns and jails, but the protesters save their real anger for this man, Rami Makhlouf, a first cousin of the president and one of the world's richest men. His critics call Makhlouf Syria's Mr. 10%. In 2008, the Americans named him as a key figure in corruption in Syria. They have since subjected him to personal sanctions. Also, there is Ali Makhlouf. He's the head of the General Security Directorate. Washington also imposed sanctions on him recently following the crackdown on anti-government protests. So there you have it. Let's explore this further on Bashar al-Assad and his inner circle with our 3 guests. In Oxford, we have Marwa Dowdy. She's a lecturer of international relations at Oxford University. In Washington, D.C., we have Muhav Jarjati, a former political advisor to the government of Hafiz al-Assad, that's Bashir's father, and currently he's a professor of Middle East Studies at George Washington University. In Paris, Haitham Mana, spokesperson of the Arab Commission for Human Rights. Welcome, all of you, to the programme. I'd like to start with you, first of all, Marwa Dowdy. Who do you think really is in charge of Syria?
Well, we're getting conflicting information about, of course, the security apparatus being very crisp about the situation and having increased and escalated the repression. And there's another scenario, which is that President Bashar al-Assad is somehow kept hostage of that security apparatus. And some other scenarios are saying that he's part of the decision-making system and that he has also agreed to the increased crackdown that we have witnessed in the last few days. So there are signals which are, in fact, showing reform. He has lifted the state of emergency and at the same time increased heavily the repression of protestations. So it's a bit, I would say, part of speculation to know exactly what is going on within the regime.
And if I was to push you to speculate, what would be your view?
My view is that I think the president has been keen on introducing reforms, but there has been like some pressure put within the regime to stop these reforms and to adopt what I would call more the Chinese model, which is to allow economic liberalization, but to impede and tame any will to contest the regime and to allow only very gradual opening of the system.
All right, Muhav Jarjati, in Washington, what's your view? Who's in charge of Syria? Is it Assad or his family of lieutenants?
It is Assad, it is his family of lieutenants, it is all of the above. I think initially when this unrest began, when this uprising began, there seemed to have been a state of confusion. Assad himself, Bashar al-Assad, was trying to be conciliatory, but at the same time we did see the beginnings of a massacre in Hama, which leads me to think that Bashar al-Assad was not the only one to be taking the decisions. Somebody else, I believe Maher al-Assad, was of the view that the security solution was better than a political solution. Since the lifting of the emergency laws, I think there has been generally a unison in the ranks above, and that is the employment of lethal force. When, again, these emergency powers have been lifted, there has no longer been a conciliatory tone. The regime seems to be determined to snuff this out brutally.
Right, and the regime would include Assad himself.
Assad himself, ultimately, he is responsible for this, and he is one taking decisions. I do believe he is in control. From time to time, you do get some confusion on the ground, and that is because there are lieutenants on the ground who are susceptible to taking immediate decisions. But overall, I do believe that he is firmly in control, he and his family.
Okay, let's move it to Paris. What's the view from there for Haytham Manna?
I think that the system of Hafez al-Assad was based in a group of military and security interests. And this group was very strong, but Assad himself was a very important and great personality behind them. But when Bashar Assad arrived to power, he hadn't the capacity to be in the same place as well as his father. And the spring of Damascus gave him this capacity, but the security apparatus stopped everything in August 2001. Up to this time, from 2001 to now, the role of the security apparatus is very, very important in the country. We saw that in the crisis of Iraq, in the crisis of Lebanon, and in the two wars in Lebanon and Gaza. And this apparatus gave to the president and to all the political class in Syria the impression that you are here because of us. You are not here because of your own legitimacy. Your legitimacy comes from our hard control of the situation in the country.
So do you mean,
Hatem,
do you mean that he's held hostage by that security apparatus, or that you know, that he wants to change, he wants to bring in reform, but he's, as I say, held hostage by the security forces and the security apparatus, as you put it, or that, you know, he directs that, he wants the country is the way he wants it to be?
Objectively, he is not the son of the system, but he is obliged to do with. And the problem of Bashar is how to combine, how to still in prison in a good situation with the political choice, and in the same time to give these people what they ask for. That means a good place in the society and a good place in the system of corruption. And these both elements are in the base of our revolt now. He cannot ask these people to go out of the corruption system and the security system which control the country. We cannot go out from the security state actually in place to a transitional democratic situation with these people.
Okay, let me bring in.
I think
we'll have Jujati. Sorry to jump in there, but I just want to bring Washington in because I can see that you're eager to jump in.
Yes, well, I agree with both of your speakers. Bashar al-Assad is a timid reformer. I agree with Dr. Dawoodi. It is the Chinese model that he has adopted. He has thus far instilled some economic reforms, no political reforms whatsoever. I agree with Haytham al-Malih that Bashar al-Assad is not Hafez al-Assad. Hafez al-Assad was a leader. He was feared. He was respected. He knew how to take momentous decisions at the right time. This is not Bashar al-Assad. I wouldn't go as far as saying that he is hostage to the security apparatus, because we have seen him transfer senior security officials from place to another. But he certainly is beholden to them. In the end, The apparatus that does dominate Syrian politics is the security apparatus, but he does lead them. So again, he has overall responsibility for them. He does take decisions. I don't think he is alone in taking these decisions. He has been able to institute some reforms. I don't think that he wants to go any further. Again, it is the Chinese model.
So in that sense, you mean that he doesn't want to go any further, or he can't go any further because even if he wanted to and tried to, he would fail because the inner circle just controls things?
The inner circle controls things, but he himself, I don't think, wants to rock the boat. He wants to keep a Syria that he has inherited from his father. He will make some further economic reforms if the regime stays in place. I don't think at the political level he will be able to, nor does he want to change a system that basically has rotted. If he were to do that, if he were to rock the boat, then he most likely would lose power, he himself and his family.
Okay, Marwa Daudi?
Well, I think the president has had an opportunity, a window of opportunity to really implement reforms and to mainly, I would say, initiate a dialogue, a national dialogue with all different political and social trends in Syria. And this window of opportunity is narrowing gradually as the repression is increasing. And therefore, I know that the president is quite popular internally, but people now are starting to wonder if he's really not taking the decision, or if he is taking the decision, he's becoming an accomplice to what is happening in Syria. And this window of opportunity, in my eyes, looking at Turkey's mediation and other countries trying to convince the president that he has a historical moment now that he could seize and to bring forward a peaceful transition within Syria, being part of this peaceful transition in dialogue with his citizens, and not choose the security solution that obviously has been opted for in the recent days.
The truth is, though, isn't it, Marwa, that they've already gone too far, that if they give way now, it'll just end up as the same fate as Mubarak's crew in Egypt.
May I jump in here, if I may? I'm sorry, go ahead, Marwa.
No, I just wanted to say, clearly there should be a way out offered for the current leadership, in the sense that the situation in Egypt, and I would say not only that, the situation in Iraq and Libya is not giving hopes for change in that sense. We've seen sectarian strife in Iraq, we see foreign-led bombing and intervention in Libya, which is leading to a stalemate. I think there should be a third way offered, but the regime is currently not choosing that third way. It has chosen to just crush the protests, and I guess I would believe that, in that sense, the legitimacy that it had so far in terms of its foreign policy, you know, the strong sense vis-à-vis Israel, the support of the Palestinian-Lebanese resistance movements, and having been able also to initiate strategic contacts with Turkey, with Iraq, started a dialogue with the Obama administration. All this would be completely cancelled if there is no internal legitimacy. And this is where there's a strategic choice to be made by the regime and by the president himself in the coming days, I would say.
Okay, Muhab Jarjuti, you were political advisor to Assad's father, Hafiz. What's your view about it all?
I think that the regime is suffering from a very acute crisis of credibility and a very acute crisis of legitimacy. I think it is beginning to be too late. That window of opportunity is closing very, very, very rapidly. And if things continue this way, even if the regime survives, I do not know how Bashar al-Assad will be able to rule over a society that is clearly telling him to leave. So the situation, I think, is beginning to be on a very slippery slope for the regime.
Okay, well, let's just take a pause there for a second, because I just want to get into another arena. The US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton expressing concern about the situation in Syria. She's also backed calls for EU sanctions against the Syrian government. She said the United States has announced targeted sanctions against key individuals and entities that have engaged in grave abuses in Syria. Together, we have to show the Syrian government that there are consequences for this brutal crackdown that has been imposed on the Syrian people. As late as mid-April, when protests in Syria were growing, the US Senator John Kerry suggested the West should offer President Assad more so he could afford to distance himself from his current ally, which is Iran, and perhaps change course. This, analysts say, is why 3 key US senators failed to persuade President Obama to declare that Assad had squandered his legitimacy and must step down. It might also explain why no sanctions were imposed on Assad himself, but only on his brother and his cousin. If the US is indeed offering Syria an opening, Assad doesn't seem interested. And even if he were, it's believed that his family would likely pounce the moment he flinches. That's one view. And finally, this view is also shared by the British Foreign Secretary, William Hague. And he said one of the difficulties in Syria is that President Assad's power depends on a wider group of people in his own family and, of course, other members of his government. I'm not sure how free he is to pursue a reform agenda. Haytham Manna, what influence do you think the international community can bring to bear on the situation in Syria as it escalates?
First of all, I ask the international community for not comparing the situation in Syria with any other country. Every situation, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, is unique, and we cannot compare countries one with other. The second thing, it is very important to know that sanctions is against human rights. And if we like to use the word sanctions, it must be personalized and only for the criminals, not for the society. Because
currently the sanctions have been imposed on his brother and his cousin, but not on Assad himself, so on individuals.
You know, there is also many sanctions against Syria at all, not only against the Assad family. And we don't accept this kind of sanctions in Syria or in any other country. But the most important thing that for me today, if I'm looking for a pacific transition in Syria, how to do? Who is my interlocutor? Is he Bashar al-Assad or the Minister of Defense or some generals in the army? Or it is the real question, because our movement, our revolt is pacifist, and we don't have the looks to use any arms in our struggle. For that, we must look in any time and and in this time, in this crucial moment, because today, to be clear, we don't have enough people in the street, and the military option is died. For that, we must look for other things. The military option will not continue because it is useless for the war as well as for the society. It is, it is really an option of destruction.
Muhaf, your thoughts from Washington?
The international community, specifically the US and the EU, have been tame thus far. They want to leave, I believe, a window open for Mr. Assad to make the right choices. In the case of the United States, these targeted sanctions are a diplomatic slap on the wrist and nothing more. Nobody has talked about Assad not being a legitimate leader anymore. In the case of the EU, to the best of my knowledge, there are no EU arms exports to Syria. So imposing that sanction on Syria, again, is a diplomatic slap on the wrist. The United States has a strategic interest in Syria. Syria is an important country which is at the intersection of different theaters of battle, whether in Iraq or Palestine or Lebanon. And I think the Obama administration prefers to continue dealing with the Assad administration, although it does not like it very much. But the Assad government is a known entity, and the US would prefer working with them rather than with the unknown. And this is why it is taking so long for Washington to berate the Assad administration. I think the same holds true for the EU. Now, should the international community withhold international legitimacy from the Assad regime, I think that would strengthen a lot domestic society in Syria in its wish for transformation.
Okay, Moa Dowdy, what do you think about this current situation now and the direction it's heading? It seems to be escalating. do you think it could ramp up to the scale of the horrors that we really don't want to think about, but the horrors of, when was it, 1982, when many thousands were killed in Hama? Is it likely to go that far?
Well, clearly what has been taking place since a few days is a brutal crackdown, major arrest, security people going to the houses and arresting women, adolescents, supposedly activists or people just calling for freedom, political freedom. The worry here is that, of course, there's an increase and an escalation, and at the same time, I don't think this could be taking place in the same circumstances as 1982. The whole world is watching. The protests are being relayed on different, internet media. The whole world is watching, and also people are being killed, but the thing is, I don't think this will also impede the protests from going on. On the contrary, it's even like alienating people who before were advocating some sort of dialogue between the regime and the people. And this choice for the security solution is somehow delegitimizing completely any option for a national dialogue if there's no measure taken very quickly, I would say, by the president himself. And at the same time, the protesters are finding, some audiences outside. They're being backed outside. I think on the issue of sanctions, if I may go back to that, sanctions, if they're targeted towards officials, are fine. And again, as Mr. Manna said, there should not be a whole program of collective punishment of the Syrian people, which refuse that. In addition, also, I think any foreign-led intervention is also refused by, I would say, including opposition and human rights groups who reject any attempt to resolve the crisis, such as in Libya. So there's a need now. The problem is we're at a crossroads, how to deal with things. And Mr. Manna said, who will be the interlocutor, clearly. And on the other side, if there's, a fall of the regime in Syria, Syria has a very particular geostrategic position. The Arab-Israeli conflict has not been resolved. It's at the forefront of that conflict. Israel is at the border. There might be risks of destabilization. And I don't think that Israel and the US would leave the situation go on if there's no deal which is made in terms of the alliance with Iran. And also to stop the support to the Palestinian and Lebanese resistance movements.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there. I need to jump in. I'm sorry, Marwa. We're just coming to the end of the programme, so I need to give our other two guests just a chance to have their say just at the end here. Hatem Manna, what do you think it's going to take for the international community to step in? Because we are seeing, as I say, seeing things getting worse, it seems, from the reports that we have, and it's hard to be precise about it, but it seems as if things are escalating. What does it need for the international community, be it the United States, be it the EU, be it the Arab League?
Frankly, I don't look to the international community as states and as Arab League or European community. I'm looking essentially to the global civil society as a real solidarity with our society. But the most important thing to me now is how many people inside Syria is involved in the revolt. If we have enough people inside Syria, the balance will change. Up to now, the military access of power stopped this capacity. And today we had as well as the same number of people in the street than last week. But last week we have less than the Friday before. And this is a real problem for us.
Okay, I've got to jump in there because we've just got
the Syrian society now.
Okay, we've got 30 seconds left on the program.
And the most important thing for me, it is...
Muhaf Jujati, can I give you the final word to you just in 30 seconds that just sum up how you see this panning out and what needs to be done?
The balance will not change even if domestic unrest increases, as long as the Syrian regime knows that the members of the Security Council are divided, that the Security Council will not take any punitive action. Countries, important countries of the international community are going to be increasingly under pressure, especially if the violence in Syria increases. They will be under pressure to take punitive measures against Damascus.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. I'm sorry we had to cut you all off. It's a discussion that could go on for many minutes, many hours indeed. Thanks to all of you, Marwa Daudi, Muhaf Jujati and Hatem Manna. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We, of course, welcome your comments. Just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, it's goodbye. Syria.